Kabru is probably one of the smartest and most skilled people in the world of Dungeon Meshi, but something that really stands out about him is his analytical ability. From being able to deduce intentions of other people to being able to grasp the severity of a situation and how best to deal with it, Kabru proves his ability to analyze is top notch. But the thing that really caught my eye about Kabru wasn't just his ability to analyze people or situations, it was the underlying anxiousness he exhibits in his thinking and some of his actions. But where does that anxiousness come from? How does it affect his perception of others and even the dungeon itself? Why is this such an interesting thing for me to focus in on? Well, let's talk about it and why I think his greatest strength is also his greatest weakness. But before all that, let's talk about where Kabru comes from and why he acts the way he does. Kabru was an orphan that lived in a village that was destroyed by monsters of a nearby dungeon. Though he survived the attack, he did lose his single mother and had no one else to care for him until he was later adopted by an elf. This elf was possibly from the same squad that was sent to deal with the dungeon near his village. Years after that, we find Kabru making a name for himself at the island where the current story takes place as one of the dungeon adventurers. He started forming his own party, but always took an interest in making sure the same incident that happened on his island wouldn't happen here. Usually this would involve disposing, stopping, or analyzing possible threats to the peace of the dungeon. Knowing how out of control people can get and how that can affect a dungeon, Kabru would keep tabs on a lot of different people and parties to make sure they wouldn't go too far while exploring the dungeon. This is also shown when he takes an interest in Laios and Fallen's party throughout the years, always keeping tabs on their party members, their dealings, their possible shady dealings with people like an arms dealer. For a long time, Kabru believed they just had a facade and are fooling people for their own greed. It's the kind of thinking that makes sense considering his background and his past trauma, but at the same time it shows a lot of his own biases. He understands a lot about people, how people act, and how they think when prompted or tempted by something, but that leads him to be unable to avoid negative biases. I think Kabru really stands out to me because I do find him to be one of the more competent people in the series, very easily being able to understand people, their motives, and knowing how to deal with them. A lot of his tactics to get close to these people usually revolve around being nice to them, trying to match their style of thinking or speaking so they lower their guard around him. This is a good way to make people feel more comfortable around you by doing things that are very comfortable or familiar to them. Kabru is also very skilled in fighting other people but seems to lack in the knowledge and experience in killing monsters. A lot of the deaths he and his party suffered was due to being caught unaware or unable to fight back against monsters. I like this duality of his, where he's very suited with dealing with people, but when it comes to the actual monster aspect of the dungeon, he seems very limited and struggles. It's like the reverse of Laios, who seems to struggle a lot with people, but when it comes to the dungeon and all the monsters inside of it, he's practically a savant of knowledge and experience. Kabru then being the one person to see the strength and potential danger of someone like Laios being Dungeon Master is also very interesting too. Though he meets Laios later and I think clears some of his past assumptions up, Kabru sees the strength of Laios' experience and love for monsters as an avenue for someone to conquer the dungeon. It's very interesting to see such an analytical character who has a lot of baggage with dungeons and monsters being able to suss out a lot going on but still missing the mark for so long in some ways because they believe they need to still be on guard even around potential allies. His analytical skills help him see so many different threats and help him be able to deal with those threats in a very efficient manner, though that's great for things like the corpse runners he keeps running into or a random party that's trying to do something nasty in the dungeon to other people. It leaves him seemingly only seeing threats around him. I'm going to get a little personal here, but when I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder many years ago, I was told by my therapist at the time that there was this common aspect and way of thinking or feeling that I displayed a lot. It was called hypervigilance. Essentially, what that is a state of being very alert and aware of any potential dangers or threats that could be coming. It doesn't matter how small the chance or how trivial it could be, I was always on alert for anything that could hurt me, others, and my peace of mind. When I read more about Kabru, I only noticed his way of thinking and analyzing problems felt very similar to things that I've done before. Though sometimes it worked and helped keep his party safe and in a position to deal with those threats, it's not a healthy mindset to get stuck in. As an example, imagine if he followed through with a paranoid thought that Laios and the rest of the party needed to be killed. He would have just been a murderer for nothing, Fallen would have stayed dead, Kabru's party would have had a worse reputation and would have made enemies of so many different parties that Laios has met along the way. I think that's one of the biggest weaknesses he shows as a character. He biases his own perceptions of people because he wants to believe that they are a threat until they prove they aren't. Knowing what Kabru experienced early in his life, I can't blame him for that style of thinking, or finding ways to keep himself and the people he cares about safe. He's doing everything he can to make sure the dungeon doesn't get out of hand and punishing those people who abuse the dungeon for their own benefit. Seeing a dungeon birth so many dangerous monsters, seeing how they can spill out into the surface world, and what he lost is probably one of the most traumatic things that can happen in this world. Then you see something like an elite squad of elven warriors and magic users who came to eliminate anything and everything so that they can squash or claim the dungeon's power. It's no wonder that he sees the inherent danger of venturing into a dungeon that a lot of others don't. A dungeon is tempting for any adventurer, the promise of glory and treasure and power just for conquering a few floors and monsters. Even before anyone got close to the bottom of the dungeon, we saw flashbacks of people stripping the dungeon for gold and every other treasure they can find. The island is heading towards a point of no return, where there's going to be a massive change in how the monsters in Thistle act, and I think that's what Kabru senses. Kabru is one of the characters that I think is going to be a big influence in how the story plays out in Season 2. We last saw him up on the surface with Shuro's party, meeting with Namari's party, and then unexpectedly meeting up with the Canaries who are here to deal with the dungeon from getting out of control. He's the only one to fully grasp the situation in the presence of the elves on the island. He knows that Laios' group is heading for the Mad Mage to save Fallen, and if they do beat him, which he believes they can, that would leave Laios with a lot of power and a great chance of being corrupted or misled in some way because of that power. If I had to guess, Kabru is going to team up with the other parties to start rushing towards Laios' party, but I don't think he's going to go for a cutthroat approach like eliminating them. I think he's going to try and do some peacekeeping. Usually this is what he does when he's put in a very stressful circumstance, like when Laios admitted to Shuro and him that Marcil used dark magic to revive Fallen. He tried to rationalize and calm Shuro down by reminding him that if he were in the same situation, he might have done the same thing. Kabru is one of the more interesting characters in Dungeon Meshi, and it's not just because he has the bluest eyes known to man. He's one of the only characters that understands the bigger picture of the dungeon and how it affects the people in the world around it. Seeing his strengths and weaknesses throughout the series helped flesh him out as a man who's doing his very best to keep the world safer from evil. In addition, as the series went on, we see him change his perspective and attitude towards others like Laios because he started to understand more about him, even if it didn't match up with what he believed or agreed with. I hope in the next season he's allowed to have some more interactions with the other parties, especially the Canaries, because I believe that would be the more interesting dynamic yet explored. Kabru confronting a direct link to his past trauma as a child and his current anxious responsibility as an adult. That's very interesting to see how that plays out. If you made it this far, I wanted to say thank you for watching. I really connected and liked Kabru a lot ever since I first saw him. He interacted with the world and others like I would, and I felt a sort of kinship with that. I liked seeing him struggle and try so hard to do what he believed was right. It was almost as interesting as watching Laios and his party fight and cook monsters. Whatever happens to him in the next season, I hope he's actually a big player in how the story unfolds. He's a very important character, and one of my favorites to see on the screen. Anyway, thank you all for watching. Remember to like and subscribe and to hit that bell icon so you can know when I upload next. Let me know what you think of Kabru down in the comments. He's an interesting little guy who is a brilliant opposite to someone like Laios. I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.